Folks, listen, I have never done this. I have never spoken to any wide public like I am going to speak today. And I am only doing it for two reasons. One is because I am 84. 84 means that biologically, in very short period of time, I will not be here. Which is no problem for me. That's, the biological clock for all of us. But before I leave, I would be remiss if I did not synthesize everything I've been fighting for and against throughout my life. I am talking to you today, folks, friends, brothers, sisters, allies. I don't care about my enemies. I care about allies, friends, folks, sisters, brothers. Those are the only people I've always worked with. I have spent a whole life, I'm 84, as I said. I was born in World War II, 1942, in the midst of World War II. We will get back to that, what that meant. So I have lived through a lot of experiences. I was born in Cuba. I'm Cuban. So I was born in a country where racism was rampant. And then came the revolution, and I joined the revolution. But I realized that the revolutionary leaders, all of them white in Cuba, in a majority black country, that they weren't ready to change that system that was inherited from racism. So I started combating the Cuban regime. I was twice in prison, concentration camp, and once I was going to be shot. I spent 28 days waiting for execution. Let me tell you something. I wrote the first volume of my experiences in Cuba are in this book. It's called Pichon. It's in French, it's in English, it's in Portuguese, and soon will be in Spanish. So you see, I have already told my story. So I am not here today looking for any sort of publicity. I don't need it. We live in a world today in which everybody wants to be seen, to be mediatized. That's, the social media, everybody wants to be there. I have never been on social media. I don't care to be there. I don't have anything to publicize. I'm not looking for either money, I'm not looking for publicity, I'm not looking for anything. I have a message. That's why I'm here today. And I want you to listen to me well, because what I have to say is extremely grave, extremely serious. We are living in the most dangerous period that humans have ever lived until now. And that's what I want to talk about. Because in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, who knows? Even tonight, I might not be here. But logically, I won't be here in the next 5, 6 years. So this is my only chance to talk to you and to tell you something that already Aimé Césaire said. There is this book here. It's called African Presence in the Americas. You know what this book was? I organized an international conference in which people came from all over the world. 1,500 people participated. I organized it at the University of Florida, where I was teaching at that time. And I brought Aimé Césaire there and President Leopold Senghor, who were the founders with Léon Damas, as you know, of the negritude movement. Why did I organize that conference? You've heard of Cheikh Anta Diop, the great scholar, the great scientist, Senegalese, with whom I had the honor of working personally to be a personal assistant for almost 8 years. We were great friends. We were political allies. He died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 62, 63. He collapsed. And with him collapsed a monument of work that was never published. He published his books, many books, Nation Nègre et Culture, Black Nations and Culture, but there was so much in his head that he took away with him. And we were all shocked. I was teaching at the University of Florida at the time. You know what I did? I took a plane and I went to Paris. I went to see Césaire and I said, Césaire was very sad. He was profoundly, deeply, he was extremely sad because he was very close to Cheikh Anta Diop. He was the one who made Cheikh Anta Diop publish his first work, Black Nations and Culture, in which Cheikh Anta Diop proved that Kemetan civilization, Kemetan, not Egyptian, because the name Egyptian was given by the Greeks. They didn't call themselves Egyptian. They didn't even know that name. Greeks came 3,000 years later. They called themselves Kemetans. They were from the land of Kemet, which means, Kemet means black woman. So they came from the land of black women. That's the name that the Kemetans gave themselves. So I said, Césaire, Cheikh Anta Diop died right now. Damas died 4 or 5 years ago. There's only you and Senghor left now, who founded the negritude movement in the 1930s. I said, so you, logically, biologically, you and Senghor are the next to die. I said, that's the way it's biology. Just as I'm saying to you, I'm the next. I'll be dead in the next 4 or 5 years. 6, perhaps 6, doesn't matter. So I spoke to him like that. And I said, Césaire, you need to come and tell the world for the last time exactly what you've been fighting for all of these 45 years. What is negritude? The young generations, they don't know. And what do you see as the future of black people in the world? You know, I spent 2 days in Paris convincing Aimé Césaire. 2 days, because he didn't want to do it. He said, you know, no, I don't do any more conferences. You know that. I had known for Césaire for 40 years, almost. A long time, almost 40 years. In Paris. When I was in exile in Paris, he was living in Paris because he was then a deputy at the National Assembly in France. So we met very often, we talked, we discussed. I was very young then. I had just fled Cuba. I finally convinced him. And I finally convinced Césaire to come to the conference. And I invited then all of the major intellectuals of the world. And they gathered there in Miami in 1987, in April 1987. For 3 days, you had all of the major intellectuals. Maya Angelou, Alex Haley. You remember Alex Haley wrote a book called Roots, Racines, which became the biggest bestseller in the world, translated into more than 130 languages. I call Alex. I say, Alex, I want you there. I call Maya Angelou. I call all of these people whom I had been working with for so many years. And a lot of them had died, like Malcolm X. You know, I worked very closely with Malcolm. He's gone. Most of the people that, you know, I had worked with had already been died, either were killed, assassinated for the same reasons that Césaire was fighting for, Cheikh Anta Diop was fighting for, that I was fighting for. And one of those, the greatest of those leaders, and I always have his picture in my house, because many people don't know him, that's Didan Kimati. Who is Didan Kimati? Didan Kimati led the most violent movement to expel Europeans from Africa. It was called the Mau Mau. For 8 years, he fought the British Army, the powerful British Army, until, well, his army, which was called the Mau Mau Army, could not resist the might of the British Empire, and he was captured along with his wife, Wanjiru, and he was executed. Since then, a lot of people, a lot of black leaders have been executed. You know their names. Boganda Bartolome, they put a bomb in his plane, they killed him. He was from Central African Republic, and he was proposing a great African federation for Africans to come together. Central African Republic is a French colony. The French were afraid of him. One day he took a flight in his own country. The bomb exploded. 1958. 59, I'm sorry. The next year, the Congo became independent under Patrice Lumumba. You must have heard of him. A lot of young people don't know of him. Patrice Lumumba tried to do what Boganda wanted to do, to unify Africa. He was assassinated in 1961. Before Lumumba and before Boganda, in Cameroon, there was a nationalist leader, Pan-Africanist leader. His name was Umnyobe, Ruben Umnyobe. He and his wife, Martha Umnyobe, started one of the biggest revolutionary movements in Africa, just like Kimati did. In the 1950s, Umnyobe started to fight in Cameroon. He raised an army, a guerrilla army, just as Kimati did, to expel the French from Africa. He was fighting to expel the British from Africa. Umnyobe fought for 4 years, was eventually caught. De Gaulle was in power at the time. The French army used napalm against the Cameroonians. It was a fierce war. Umnyobe didn't have much support. It's not like today that you have China, Russia, who can aid you, other countries. No, he was isolated, needed weapons, he couldn't fight. So finally they caught Umnyobe and they executed him. The French cut off his head and exhibited his head all over Cameroon so that the Cameroonians would understand that they had to stay quiet. Now, why do I talk about all of these things, about the people who were assassinated? Steve Biko in South Africa. In Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown. Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. I saw Malcolm X. I was with Malcolm X not even 3 months before he was killed. We worked together. I worked with him. I was his assistant in Paris when he came to Europe. I had known him from before in Harlem. So 3 months, hardly 3 months after we had met in Paris, and we worked together for many days until he went back to the States, they killed him. So as we were in Paris, walking around in the streets in Paris, the killers of Malcolm X were there looking for the right moment to kill him. So they could have killed him in Paris. They could have killed him right there in Paris. So they waited until he got back to the States, to America. And they killed him there in front of his wife. His wife was pregnant of 3 kids. And his wife was there, and he had other 2 girls. So in front of his wife, they killed him. And then they killed Evers, the other big leader. And then they killed Martin Luther King. And they continued killing Thomas Sankara, Frelimo, Mozambique's leader, Mondlane, killed. The other Mozambican leader, Samora Machel, killed. Bomb in his airplane, killed. You know, they like putting bombs in planes. They don't care how many people die as long as they eliminate those people. So you understand now that I've been fighting my life in these conditions. So I'm not interested in social media. I'm not interested in money. I'm not interested in notoriety. I have notoriety. Everybody knows me through this book. And you know who Fela Kuti is. Everybody knows who Fela Kuti is. You know why? Because today his music has taken over the entire planet. It's called Afrobeats. He created Afrobeats. I became known internationally because Fela, who's my close ally and comrade, political comrade, asked me to write his official biography. So that official biography became, you know what it became? It even became a Broadway play, Broadway musical that lasted a full year on Broadway, made millions of dollars for its producers. It was inspired, this Broadway production, it's called Fela, was inspired by this book. So I'm saying these things because I want you to understand that I am not here because I don't need money. I'm not rich, but I don't need money. And I don't need publicity. I could have done this if I wanted before. I am here because something serious is happening in the world. Something grave is happening in the world. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Because that conference emissated something which was very serious. He says Hitler is not behind us. It is ahead of us. People were shocked because Hitler was dead. World War II is finished. He was saying, no, it's not finished. Hitler is ahead of us. And that's what we're going to have to deal with. I will be dead, but Hitler is coming back. So I'm here to tell you something very serious. You see everything that's going on in the world? The war in Iran, Israel attacking Lebanon to take it over. Israel has already taken over part of Syria, the Golan Heights. They have taken over parts of Jordan, the West Bank. They have destroyed Gaza, taken it over. And they're now talking about what they call Great Israel, attacking Iraq and taking also Iraq. So Israel is talking about becoming a country as big as France. They call that the Great Israel. So this war is going on right now. And their main enemy is who? Iran. Because Iran said, no, the Israelis are not going to do this. And Iran has been fighting, running very hard to get atomic weapons because Israel has more than 80 atomic bombs. Enough to erase Iran 60 times. So Iran said, this is not going to happen. I'm going to have atomic weapons also. But Netanyahu, the head of the state of Israel, waited until Trump came to power. Because Trump and Netanyahu are the same. But I'm going to tell you who these people are and why it is important what I'm saying. Because you've read your newspapers. We're living in a strange world. in another dimension, that something no one ever experienced. You were living in a world in which you can decide to go and take a president in his bedroom, take him out, put him in an helicopter, fly him away, and put him in prison because you don't like him. Not because he's a dictator, because you want his oil, the petroleum of his country. That's what happened to Maduro. And you read it in the papers, you saw it in the press, you saw it on TV. It was about oil. It's not about dictatorship, it's not about democracy. Right now, what is happening in Iran, the bombing, the destructions of Iran, is not about the Ayatollahs being dictators. Because the best friends of the United States and the best friends of Europe are dictators. Look at the dictators in Africa. They're not bombing them. Look at Haiti. Gangs of criminals, of thugs in Haiti, right close to the United States. The United States doesn't care. You know why? Because those gangs of criminals are destroying the only nation that stood up in the world during slavery and became independent, beating the best army in the world, the Napoleon's army, the Napoleonic army. And Haiti was an example to the entire black world, to the entire global Africa. And they have decided to destroy it. How are they destroying it? Through criminal Haitians. The same way as they destroyed Africa through criminal Africans. Criminal white people, Europeans, did not go into the deep parts of Africa to catch 15 million people and ship them to the Americas. African criminals did it. Corrupt African criminal elites did that. And the consequence is all of the diasporas of the world. All of the diasporas of the world. So I am speaking today to all of those diasporas. I'm speaking to continental sub-Saharan Africans. 1.5 million people. I am speaking to the American diaspora, of which the two biggest components are in Brazil, 110 million people of African origin. The one in the United States, 50 million people of African origin. The diaspora in the Caribbean of 35 million people. And I'm speaking to the diaspora in the Pacific. Many people don't know that 30 million black people are living in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Generally, young people don't know about these things. I've been there. I've been to Papua New Guinea. I've been to Fiji. I've been to Australia. I've been to several countries. I've been to India, to southern India, where you have a large populations of black people. Southern India is black. They call themselves Dravidians. They're black. They're blacker than I am. I've been there to work with the black leaders who are called Dalits. The Dalit movement, I've been there to work with them. I've been to the Pacific to work with the independence movement of blacks in the Pacific. I think you know about the struggle of the Kanaks to be independent from France. So in the Pacific, you have that diaspora. So I am addressing that diaspora of the Pacific and of Southeast Asia. Because in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, you have the original black populations, the Etas. I was there too, to work with them. I was not able to go to Malaysia to work with the Semang, the Sakai, and the Senoi populations who are being oppressed because the government of Malaysia prevented me from going. The same as the government in Thailand. But that's just to tell you that I've been all around the world on this struggle. I have not been publicizing anything. I've been involved in that struggle. And in Europe, I lived in France. I was involved in the struggle there. I lived for 8 years in Africa. I was involved in the struggle there. In the Maghreb, Northern Africa, where the Arabs are oppressing black people, I went to Morocco, I went to Mauritania, I went to work with the leaders there. And I'm going to talk to you about that struggle today. But I've lived all over the world. So therefore, I think you should listen to me on two counts. One, because I am not playing, I am not kidding around. I'm saying, this is my last time and the only opportunity I have to talk to you folks on a worldwide level to tell you one thing which is extremely important. Everything you're seeing happening in the world, Trump throwing out people, Haitians, blacks, Africans out of the United States by the tens of thousands, they're being thrown out. Europe is throwing out all of the black people from Europe. Be careful, because in all of these countries, the parties which are rising are the parties that he said would rise. Everybody thought that World War II was over, that Nazism was over. He said Nazism is not in the back, is in the front. So I'm here to tell you that Hitler is back. Hitler is back. Except that today he speaks many languages. He's multilingual. And today he's not in Germany. He's all over. He's multinational. He's all over the world. And you know, today he doesn't have that funny little mustache that Hitler had. Ridiculous little mustache that people laughed. No, he's back without the mustache. You know, you've heard of Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a famous German economist and social critic. I am not a Marxist. I have fought against Marxism. I wrote a book called Marxism and the Racial Question. And I proved there that that the founders of Marxism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, were racist. They supported slavery, the enslavement of Africans. They supported it. They supported colonization. They said, this is how Europe can become a great civilization. So, crush them. So I'm not a Marxist. I wrote a book about these traitors in Africa. It's called Disquieting Africa. The Africa that makes us feel uneasy. I denounce the corruption, the treachery of African leaders. I wrote a book on the civil wars in Africa, led by the Cuban governments and the Russian Empire to take over Africa. You know the amount of time that it has taken me to write all of those books? It has taken me 30 years. So therefore, I think I have the authority to tell you that, yes, Hitler is back. And Karl Marx, that famous German economist and social critic that I'm talking about, he once said something that has always struck me. He said, history always repeats itself. First as tragedy, then as farce. You know, humanity has experienced many tragedies. But the greatest of these was the extermination of between 50 and 80 million indigenous people on the American continent. It was a monumental tragedy that occurred within less than 50 years. after the arrival in this hemisphere of European colonizers. They were Portuguese mainly and Spanish. During that same period that they were destroying 80 million native inhabitants in this country, European nations descended upon the African continent with overwhelming force. The invasion of the African continent by Western Europe beginning in the 16th century was aided by these same corrupt, greedy, native coastal oligarchies. And because of that collaboration between African traitors and European predators, were uprooted and destroyed on the spot in Africa, a population estimated at 30 million people. So over a period of 3 centuries, you had 30 million people exterminated in Africa or shipped to the new, what they call the New World. From this continental upheaval, between 12 and 15 million African captives ended up in the Americas. They arrived here alive. 12, 15 million arrived here alive in the Western Hemisphere to be enslaved on racial grounds. That was racial slavery in the Americas. The Caribbean, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Cuba, Haiti, all of the Caribbean, and all of South America, Brazil, Venezuela, all over the Western Hemisphere, the United States. To give you an idea, while the Western Hemisphere was being emptied of its native population, the African continent, too, was being emptied by a massive demographic hemorrhage. Taken together, these two events constituted the greatest tragedy in the history of the human species. Have you stopped to think about this? And this was only 500 years ago that this was done. You know, of the 15 million people that were sent to this hemisphere, you know how many landed in the United States? 385,000. Some say 358. It was between not even 500,000. 385 to 400,000 people landed as slaves, enslaved in the United States. But you know how many landed in Brazil? Of this massive African demographic hemorrhage, which was a Holocaust on a continental scale. Other people talk about Holocaust. But this is a Holocaust on a continental scale, not a Holocaust on the scale of 6 million or 4 million or 3 million or 8 million people. I respect all forms of Holocaust and all forms of genocide, but I do not allow anyone to minimize the Holocaust that was committed against us, which led to the extermination of 30 million Africans and to the enslavement of 50 million, which were sent to the Americas. So of those, that huge 50 million, you know how many landed in Brazil alive? 40% of 15 million. That is about 5 million captives. Brazil alone had 40%. That's how Brazil was built. That's how the United States was built. So of those 380,000 or 400,000 African captive people brought to the United States, today from that group, small group, you have today 50 million African Americans, Black Americans. And you have now 110 million Black Brazilians. You know, analysts have estimated that in Africa itself, between 4 and 6 million Africans perish fighting in wars of resistance against the traffickers. Nobody talks about this. You know, the United Nations the other day declared that all of these things was the gravest crime against humanity. But nobody talks about the number of Africans who died resisting in these wars in Africa. This is nothing but a succession of horrors and horrors and horrors. You want to add? I'll add another figure to this horror. Do you know that when they shipped the captives, these were not slaves. They shipping captives, people they captured, prisoners. They were not slaves. People were made slaves here. They were not taken as slaves in Africa. People talk about the slave traffic. There was no slave traffic. There was a traffic in captive Africans. That's a difference. These are human beings who were leading normal lives, and all of a sudden, their lives were disrupted, and they found themselves in slave ships. You know how many of those people perish going from Africa to the Americas? Either because they rebelled and they threw them into the ocean, either because they were so sick, they threw them into the ocean. 300 years of slavery, you know how many people were thrown into the ocean or died between Africa, just in the what they call the Middle Passage, just between Africa and what they call the New World. You know how many people died? Before they could get here, 3 million. They estimate that at least 3 million Africans perished during the Atlantic crossing over a period of 350 years, that the so-called slave trade and racial slavery itself lasted in the Western Hemisphere. Do you know something? Listen well to what I'm going to say to you. People say, oh, you know, we can't talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about it. They say, oh, that's ancient history. The Holocaust of Jews is not ancient history to anyone. Everybody has it in films every day, newspapers. Everybody's talking about the Holocaust of 6 million Jews. But when it comes to talk about the Holocaust of black people, you saw what happened at the United Nations. Israel, the United States, and Argentina, which exterminated all of its blacks. Israel, which is talking about the Holocaust of 6 million Jews, they voted against it. They said, we are not going to condemn the enslavement of Africans and the slave trade as having been a crime committed, the gravest crime against humanity. We're not going to do it. And you know what the Europeans, the European Union did? They said, we won't vote. We will abstain. We won't say anything. Because we don't consider that that was the greatest crime. Many crimes have been committed, so why you want this to be the biggest crime? So they say, okay, we will abstain. Abstaining is voting for something. I think you understand that. If a man is raping a woman in the street, and you abstain from helping that woman from being raped, that's not neutral. You are not abstaining. You are allowing a rape. So when the United States of Trump said against, Argentina said contra, and Israel said niet, the Europeans said abstain, which is like You, in front of a rape of a woman, not attacking the rapist, calling the police, and defending this woman who's being violated. So abstention is not neutral. Abstention is for. So you're either for or against. So I'm here to tell you what I am against. The beginning of the 16th century, the African continent experienced an overall population decline. That means they disappeared of approximately 30 million people. That event defies the imagination. Can you imagine that 30 million people disappearing? It's just like the 80 million who disappeared in 50 years here from the hemisphere. They disappeared. They killed them. Extermination. So they exterminated 30 million people in Africa. The current situation in Africa of endemic impoverishment, poverty in African populations, the weakness of the 55 nations that constitute Africa. They are weak. Africa is not united. They are weak. 55 little weak countries, what can they do? That situation of weakness, of poverty, you imagine Africa, the richest country in the world, in the planet. Everybody wants to take Africa today. Everybody, the Chinese, the Russians, the Turks, the Iranians, Israel, the United States, everybody wants to take Africa. You know why? Africa alone monopolizes 42 of the 48 strategic minerals and resources of the world. That's why they want to take Africa. So the current situation of poverty, of corrupt leaders, criminal leaders in Africa who are killing their own people, that situation, which is aided and fostered from the outside, that situation of total weakness is due to the fact that that demographic collapse of 30 million and the extraction of 15 million who were sent abroad. That's why Africa is in the state that it is today. So when the African Union and the UN designate that as the greatest crime committed against humanity, that's the least you can do. You know, Aimé Césaire, who is a brilliant exponent of negritude, he declared one day, and as I told you, the Nazi concentration camps emerged in the Americas several centuries before the Hitler regime. That's what he said. Read Discourse on Colonialism. He's saying, no, it's not Hitler. Don't talk about Hitler. Don't you dare talk about Hitler, he said to the Europeans, because you are Hitler. Hitler did, he says, your only problem with Hitler, he said in Discours sur le colonialisme, Discourse on colonialism. He said, your only problem with Hitler is not the problem that Hitler is killing people, killing Jews. He says, that's not your problem. He says, the problem that you have is not that Hitler is killing, because you have been killing millions and millions of Africans in Africa and in the Americas and enslaving them for 350 years. So you cannot talk to me about Hitler. He says, you know what is the problem between you and Hitler? The fact that Hitler is killing white people. He says, that's your only problem with Hitler. He's killing Jews and he's killing Europeans. He said, because you were killing only blacks, but Hitler is killing whites. He says, that's your problem with Hitler. That's what Aimé Césaire said. The same Aimé Césaire that when we did the conference said, Hitler is not behind us, he is in front of us. So today, 500 years after this catastrophe that I'm talking to you about, the greatest catastrophe suffered by the human species, history is repeating itself. Because there is a global Nazism which is rising from the ashes, from its own ashes. It is growing rapidly through the promotion of genocidal wars, the expulsion of millions of immigrants from Europe, from the United States, from Israel, from the Arab countries, the serial murder of young black citizens. Young people have been killed in the United States. You remember Floyd? They strangulated him in front of the cameras. They didn't care. The cameras were rolling, and you saw Floyd saying, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. You're killing me." In front of the world. The world watched it. And these white Nazis strangled them to death. You saw it. Don't tell me you didn't see it. And that's Nazism. So in the streets of Brazil, Colombia, the United States, all over the world, young black people are being killed like if they were dogs, pigs, chickens. The indigenous population, which was already 80 million were exterminated, so what is left, they are exterminating now. In Ecuador, Brazil, Peru, Guatemala, Salvador, and even in Mexico, in the part to the south, which is called Chiapas, where they are fighting. So the indigenous population too is being exterminated. And in Australia, when I went there, the black Australians told me that they're exterminating them using birth control. Sometimes they take the women to the hospitals. If a woman is sick, a black woman is sick in Australia, she's afraid to go to the hospital. You know why? Because when they put her in the hospital, they take out her reproductive organs. And the Brazilian government was doing that 35 years ago. Every black woman who went into the hospital, they cut off their reproductive organs. So they came out, they didn't even know they had been sterilized. That's genocide. So the genocidal Nazism is here today. All of those bombings that you see everywhere in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran, everything which is going on, the destruction of Gaza, you saw it. In 2 years, they wiped out practically 100,000 Gazawis. And they destroyed Gaza. There's not even one building left. The Israelis did it. Those same Israelis who say that they were exterminated in concentration camp during World War II, they did it. They did that genocide in front of your eyes and in front of my eyes. We saw it in the last 3 years. So don't tell me you don't know. Nazi-fascism is back. Without Hitler, this time. A new catastrophe staged by the same protagonists as yesterday. The same people, the same actors, is unfolding. Is unfolding as a tragedy and as a farce. You know, it's a tragedy because people are dying under the bombs. And you know what's the farce? The farce is that people are watching it on TV. And no one is saying anything. No one is doing anything. Only a limited number of minorities, they go to the streets. They are beaten by the police and they are protesting. But the majorities are watching all of this happening. And they're doing it, watching like this. You know, they cross their arms. That's the farce. I refuse to be part of that farce. I prefer to be part of the tragedy because I came from that tragedy. And don't tell me that slavery is in the past. As you know, white people, every time they say, oh, you know, black people are always talking about slavery, but that's gone, it's in the past. Why are they bringing this up? Nobody says that about the Jews. The Jews don't allow you to talk about them like that. And the Arabs don't allow you to talk to them, to talk about their experience like that. And the Armenians, who were, genocide was committed against the Armenians, remember, in 1915, by the criminal, genocidal, and fascist government of Turkey. Remember, the Armenians want reparations for that genocide. 3 million Armenians were killed. Children, men, and women. So every population which has been genocide is asking for reparations. And when black people ask for reparations, everybody says, no, we will not repair anything because we are not guilty of anything. Why don't blacks cool down? Why are they so paranoid? Everything is good today. We're in a post-racial society. Blacks have never been as happy as they are today. Slavery is gone. Why continue talking about it? That's where the farce comes. And we're being a part of it, of the farce. Let us examine this whole situation region by region. And let's begin with the Middle East, because right now the bombs are falling there, and you're seeing it in TV, you're reading it in the newspapers, you're seeing it on social media, so you can't tell me you're not seeing it. The bombs are falling, they're dying, people are dying, there's a fight. What is this fight about? Trump says it's a fight for democracy, that the Ayatollahs, that Iran cannot have the atomic bomb, and it's a fight between Iran on the one hand and the United States and Israel on the other hand, two nuclear powers. Iran doesn't have nuclear powers. Israel has between 80 and 100 nuclear bombs, atomic bombs, to exterminate the entire Middle East. And of course, you know that the United States has an arsenal of between 4,000 and 5,000 thermonuclear weapons, enough to destroy the entire planet 18 times. So two nuclear powers are attacking Iran. Iran has a population of 88 million. Okay, let's examine Iran, where this is all happening. I want you to understand that Iran is not only a country of Persians. Where they are bombing there, you see that area which is being bombed is in the south. Who lives in the south of Iran? Of course, you have Kurds. The Kurds of Iran, they represent 10% of the population. The Persians of Iran are the majority. They represent 51% of the population, or 52% of the person. The Azerbaijanis represent 13% of the population. But do you know that the press is not talking to you about the majority, the minority, which is the majority in Iran? Out of these three minorities, Kurds, Azerbaijanis, and then the majority population of Persians, they are Farsi, they speak Farsi. That's the old Persian Empire. Because today the fight is between empires. Don't fool yourself. The fight is not about democracy. The fight is between empires. The Turks are the former Ottoman Empire. Iran is the former Persian Empire. Russia is the former Russian Empire. And the United States is the actual global empire. I said we were going to examine this thing about Iran. which is the primary arena of the conflict between the Muslim world and the Judeo-Christian world, because that's the problem. But this is not a problem of religion. Netanyahu, the Israelis say it's a problem of religion, that God gave them that land and that the Arab, took the land afterwards. It's not about land, it's about resources. Listen, since at least the 8th century, the Middle East has been the largest hub for the import and export of slave labor from sub-Saharan Africa. Did you know that? That long before the Europeans came, 800 years before the Europeans came, that 25 to 30 million sub-Saharan Africans were taken out of Africa by the Arab world and taken to the Middle East and just sold all over the world. So the Middle East, you're talking about the first time that Africans were enslaved. Racial slavery was invented in the Middle East by the Arabs between the 6th and 8th century. By the time the Abbasid dynasty was in power and took over the world, something like 20 million Africans, were taken out of Africa throughout a period of 800 years. Yeah? During the Abbasid period, something like 10 million or 12 million were already taken under the Abbasids only. So from there, these enslaved populations were exported, shipped, just as commodities. They were sent to Eastern countries. They were sent to India. They were sent to Pakistan. I saw them in India. I spoke to them. They had a national conference. They're called Sidis in India. And in Pakistan, they're called Sidis. So I went to the National Sidi Conference in India 8 years ago. So they were sent to India, they were sent to Pakistan, they were sent to Afghanistan, they were sent to Sri Lanka, they were sent to China, and they were sent to Korea, among others. Iraq, Turkey, Iran, these were the largest recipients, those who took the most slaves, enslaved Africans, of this enormous demographic contingent subjected to racial slavery. This was not just slavery, this is racial. They said only blacks must be enslaved because God said that they are an inferior race. They are the children of Ham. Have you ever heard of that? They said God cursed them. And he says, Ham will be the slave of all of his other brothers and cousins. Of course, this is what they were saying in the Arab world. They said, okay, so black people are the sons of Ham, so we'll enslave them. It's a crime against Islam to enslave white people. That's what was said. That's how racial slavery began. Many analysts point to the 7th and 8th centuries, and they said that's the period when racial slavery effectively emerged. At this very moment, do you know that there's a struggle by all of the descendants of those formerly enslaved black people in the Middle East? And you know where they are? In Iran, the same area that is being bombed now. In Israel, all over North Africa, which the Arabs have taken, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, all of the Middle East, you have an enormous black diaspora who has been there as slaves. We were slaves for 350 years. You know how long they were enslaved? They were enslaved for 1,300 years. They were in slavery. You know when they were abolition took place? Abolition took place for us the other day. But for them, it was just recently. They're fighting now. Fighting to be free. Mauritania abolished slavery in 1982. Do you know when Iran, which is fighting now the Americans and Israel, do you know when Iran abolished slavery? under the pressure of Europe and of the League of Nations. The League of Nations came before the United Nations. First they formed the League of Nations, and then came after World War II, the United Nations. It was the League of Nations which said, no, 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 slavery has to be abolished in Iran and all over the Middle East. You know, when slavery was abolished in Iran, that is now fighting the Americans and the Israelis, 1929. Do you believe me that you can go to Iran and talk to people who were slaves? They're still alive. Talk to their descendants. I'll give you a personal example, very personal. I was born in Cuba in 1942. Slavery was abolished in Cuba in 1986. Do you know that if I had been born 65, 62 years earlier, I would have been a slave in Cuba? Figure it out. Slavery is abolished in 1986. Carlos Moore is born in 1942. Figure it out. Figure it out. It's very easy. Take your calculator and figure it out. How many years? Listen, let's be serious. What we're living today is an extremely serious moment, because this is the last moment. This is our last chance. And this is why I'm talking to you today. It's our last chance. At this very moment, militarily disproportionate war is raging in this region in the Middle East between twin allies. Israeli-American imperialism is one imperialism. They're twins. They're twins. Like if they were born out of the same womb. Israeli imperialism and American imperialism, it's the same thing. And they're fighting against the Islamic Republic of the Ayatollahs in Iran on the other hand. And they said it's because the Ayatollahs are not democratic people. But the United States don't care about democracy. The biggest dictatorships in the world, they have established it. The dictatorship in Chile of Pinochet, they established it. The dictatorship in Argentina of Varela, they established it. The dictatorship in Guatemala, which overthrew the government of Jacobo Arbenz, they established it. The dictatorship in Venezuela, which put Rojas Pinilla in power, they established it. The dictatorship in Nicaragua that killed Sandino and put in the very, very murderous dictatorship in Nicaragua, they established it. Let's go back to Iran. Who established the dictatorship in Iran? The Americans? You don't remember because you're young, but in 1952 there was a revolution in Iran. And that revolution threw out the dictatorial rulers in Iran under the Shah of Iran. The Shah, who is Reza Pahlavi. And that revolution was directed by a man called Mossadegh. The American government did not accept the new democratic government. You know what they did? They overthrew Mossadegh. And they brought back the Shah. And now they have this Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, in the United States. They're ready to put him back in Iran. And the Americans are talking about they are fighting for democracy in Iran. And the Israeli government, of all governments, is talking about they're fighting Iran because Iran is not democratic. Listen, either you're a fool or I'm a fool, because this is a farce. The whole fight in that area is about oil, petroleum, resources. Everybody wants it and everybody needs it, because to survive in the 22nd century, you need those African resources. They have everything. Europe doesn't have anything. What does Europe have? Europe got everything from Africa. You take away Africa from Europe, and Europe is dead. Japan, big power. What does Japan have? Zero. They get everything from Africa and the oil from the Middle East. Look what is happening. Iran cuts off, in 3 weeks, cut off, closed the Gulf, closed the Strait of Hormuz, and already the whole economy of the world is in crisis. So that shows you that these countries don't have the resources. It's Africa which has the resources. And the oil is in Nigeria, the Middle East, Angola. The whole platform of West Africa is nothing but oil, which has never been touched. From Namibia, you go straight up to Senegal, and Mauritania is nothing but oil. You have two big oil platforms in the world, the African, West African platform, and the Caribbean platform, which goes from Brazil straight up to Venezuela and Colombia. That's why Maduro, they picked him up in his bed and took him up to the United States, because Maduro said, no, you're not going to take this oil. So Trump said, okay, you will see that I'm going to take the oil. So it was because Maduro was a dictator? Of course not. Maduro is a dictator? Yes, he is. But that's not the reason why they took him out of his bed. They took him in a terrorist, organized way. Took him with his wife out of his bed and took him into a helicopter, flew him to Guantanamo, and flew him to the United States. That happened in front of your and my eyes. And we watched it on TV. The bombings in Iran, you know who is getting bombed in Iran? Who is being destroyed? They are bombing, you know, you've heard of the island of Kark. That's in the south. The southern part of Iran, you know who lives there? Afro-Iranians, the former slaves, commonly referred to as Zanji, Abashi, or Bandari. These populations are located on the coast of the Persian Gulf. They are concentrated into 4 to 5 provinces, mainly the provinces of Hormozgan, Bushehr. That's where they are mainly concentrated, and the Hormuz region. That's where the Strait of Hormuz is. They are the ones who are paying the price, the heaviest price of those bombings by the Americans and Israelis. Did you know that? Therefore, the main victims of this conflict right now are the Afro-Iranian populations, the former enslaved people of Iran, which only abolished black slavery, as I said to you, under strong international pressure in 1929. Iran has 80-something, 88 or something, and of those, 1.8 to 2 million people are black people, Afro-Iranians. They are the ones who are paying the price. Let's move to the Middle East. There, as elsewhere, the formerly enslaved populations, Afro-Iranians, Afro-Turks, and Afro-Arabs, originating Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Turkey, all of those countries, black people are hated. They are subjected, they have been subjected for centuries, for more than 1,300 years, they have been subjected to severe, terrible discrimination based on their skin color and their distant sub-Saharan African origins. But you know what happened? These people came awake. They shook, something happened, like an earthquake. You know what it was, that earthquake? The election of Barack Obama as President of the United States in 2008. That sparked a wave of ethnic protests and civil rights struggles within those communities in the Middle East. And it did the same thing in Israel. Among the oppressed black Israelis, they started fighting. And this fight has been met with brutality throughout this region. Arab, Turkish, Iranian, Israeli authorities have reacted with brutality to suppress these people. Netanyahu is one of the biggest enemies of Barack Obama. Now, this is a man who's talking about concentration camps in Germany, that his grandparents came from concentration camps. This is a man who voted against the United Nations, considering the enslavement of, for 350 years, of Africans as the greatest crime against humanity. That's the man who is ruling Israel. Erdogan, the dictator in Turkey, is he better than Netanyahu? The Ayatollahs who are ruling in Iran, are they better than Netanyahu or better than Erdogan? Let me tell you what's going on. In Turkey, the Afro-Turks had a national association of Afro-Turks. I spoke to them. I met them in Germany at a meeting which there was at the Max Planck Institute. I met the people who represented them. I met them, and they told me what was going on in Turkey. And you know what's going on in Turkey? That National Association of Afro-Turk was set on fire. The whole building went up in flames. And you know what happened immediately afterwards? Allegedly, the organization's president died shortly after the fire in a mysterious car accident that was never investigated by the Turks. So I can tell you that he was assassinated. Nobody can prove it because no investigation was done. But that's what is being done to the Afro-Turks. You think that that's the only one? No. In Iraq, there's a big population of 2.5 million people, blacks in Iraq, the former slaves. They are called Zengi in Iraq. They formed a powerful movement. When Barack Obama became president, they said, well, there's no reason why we cannot fight here and become respected. So they formed a party. And that party, the name of that party was Ansar al-Hurriya, which means Movement of Free Iraqis. They're saying we are free people. Ansar al-Hurriya. All of you who are on the social media, look it up. That party was banned recently. And the leader of that party, his name is Jalal Diab Tijil. He was assassinated in Basra in 2013. This is what happened. He was assassinated. Anytime anybody in the Middle East, any leader, local leader, start a movement for civil rights, a movement to help their people come out of the current situation of oppression, of deep oppression in which they are, their leaders are assassinated, exactly as Martin Luther King was assassinated, exactly as Malcolm X was assassinated, exactly as Medgar Evers was assassinated, exactly as Steve Biko was assassinated in South Africa, exactly as Lumumba was assassinated in the Congo, exactly as Bartholomew was assassinated in Chad, and exactly as all of Walter Rodney was assassinated in Guyana. You've never heard of Walter Rodney, most important political thinker of the Caribbean. They assassinated him in Georgetown in Guyana. So throughout the Middle East, that's what they do. They assassinate all of the leaders. Right now, Right now, you know what is happening in North Africa. Let me tell you what's happening in Tunisia. In Tunisia, there's a strong movement going on. That movement is being led by a very powerful woman. And this woman, her name is Mosba. They call her the Rosa Parks of the Middle East. Because the Middle East now is on fire. The Afro-Palestinians are asking for freedom. These Afro-Israeli, who are the Falashas, I think you know about the Falashas, they're asking for freedom. And the immigrant black population in Israel is also asking for freedom. Did you know that all of the immigrants, if you're a black immigrant in Israel, they send you to concentration camp in the Negev desert, where the heat is so intense that people die. So in Israel, they concentrate you in concentration camps. These are the Israelis who are talking about concentration camps of Hitler. So that's where these people are. These are sub-Saharans. You know how many? According to what Israelis, liberal, anti-establishment Israelis have told me, that there are around 50 to 80,000 black immigrants, and these are concentrated in these camps in the Negev desert. Do you know what it is to be in a desert like Negev? And there are no air conditioners there. People are dying in those camps. But the same thing is not only happening in Israel. But just to get off the subject of Israel, do you know how the Israelis call the Israeli blacks, who are the Falashas? You know what's the term for black? You and me, you know what they call us in Israel? They call us Kushi. And you know what Kushi means? They will say, come here, Kushi, in Hebrew. When sometimes black tourists come there, and they see that the Israelis are laughing at them, and they say, Kushi, Kushi. And they say, what the hell is Kushi? Well, let me tell you what Kushi is in Israel. Kushi is exactly nigger in the United States. Negrito de mierda in Cuba. Negrito de mierda means nigger of shit, shit nigger. That's in Cuba. And nigger, negrito de mierda in Brazil is called criollo or neguinho. That's what they call us in Israel, Kushi. And you know what's the term that the Israelis use, that Netanyahu has invented that term? He says, these are not African immigrants. He said they're not immigrants. He said they're infiltrators who are infiltrating Israel to make babies with Israeli women and to blacken Israel. And we're not going to allow this. That's what's going on in Israel. Did you know that? And did you know that that's what's going on in North Africa, in the Maghreb, where the Arabs dominate? You know, the Arabs dominate Egypt. They took it over. They invaded, took over Egypt. They took over Libya. They took over Tunisia. They took over Morocco, and they took over Algeria. So those 5 countries in the north of Africa is already taken by the Arabs. Let's talk about only one of them. Let's not talk about Libya, because what's going on in Libya, you know. You know that black people are slaves in Libya. You know that. Enslaved. Let's talk about the most liberal of those countries is Tunisia. You remember there was a revolution which they called the Spring Revolution in Tunisia, right? Okay. After that revolution, who came to power? Came to power a man who became president after the revolution, and his name is Kais Saied. Remember the name, Kais Saied. He came into power through a civilian coup in 2019. And you know what he did immediately? He unleashed a wave of terror against the native Afro-Tunisian population, which constitutes 18% of Tunisia, of the total population. And you know what he did? He said all of these black immigrants who are inside of Tunisia, who come from Senegal, Ivory Coast, Chad, Mali, all of these countries, he says they are blackening the country. He said this is a plot organized by African governments to blacken a white country like Tunisia, which is Arab. And he said, I won't allow it. And you know what he did? He concentrated, sent the army, and they were arrested. I mean, nobody was safe. They break down your doors, they come in, they kick out your doors, they take your children, they take your wives, they take everything, and they set fire to your house, and they take you to the desert. 100,000 black Africans were thrown out of Tunisia in the last 2 years. Did you know about that? A very courageous woman, her name is Sadi Mosba. She organized a movement in Tunisia which is called MNT. And she's called the Rosa Parks of the Arab world. The Rosa Parks of the Arab world. You know why? She is the president. She founded one of the most powerful movements. MNT is a black association that is very powerful. And she said, no, you cannot throw out our brothers and sisters from sub-Saharan Africa. They have done nothing here. They are not criminals, as you are saying. You are saying that they are blackening the country. And how about us black Tunisians who are fighting? We are fighting for our civil rights. Do you know that in Tunisia, you know what they're fighting against? They're fighting for the constitution to change. To change what? I'll tell you what they want to change. Did you know that when you are a black Tunisian, your name starts by the term Abd? Now, what does Abd mean? A-B-D. Abd in Arab means slave. Because that's how in the Arab world it is. If you're the slave of this family, you're the slave of this family, you're the slave of this. So therefore, if your name is Karim, you just don't call yourself Karim or Carlos. I'm Carlos Moore. You just don't call yourself Carlos Moore. You say Abd Carlos Moore. In other words, Carlos Moore, who is the slave of such and such a family. That's what they're fighting against in Tunisia. And this woman, Mosba, formed that organization, the Black Association, which is called MNT, to fight against this. They said, we are not going to be called slaves anymore. And the constitution has to be changed. And Kais, the president, Said, he says, we will not change the constitution because you're still the equivalent of slaves. He said, we're not going to change this. This is our culture. He says, this is our culture. That's the way our culture is. You don't have shackles. So, okay, so what are you complaining about? And let's not talk about slavery because that happened a long time ago. That's what's happening in the Middle East. So you know what they did? She said, no, I'm not going to accept this. And she called the blacks of Tunisia, and they rallied, they went into the streets of Tunis, tens of thousands of blacks into the streets. And the president said, okay, arrest her. And they accused her of subversion against the state. And they said, she's a thief. Because in her organization, all of that money which she's getting to do these manifestations, that's for her. That's embezzlement. So they accuse her of her embezzlement, of being a thief, of being corrupt, of being subversive, and of being against the state, which is Remember, in Tunisia, when you're against the state, that's treason. And treason carries the penalty of death. So they say she's threatening the national security of the country. So she's been in jail for 2 years under those charges. And you know what just happened 3 weeks ago? They took her out of jail, not for her to go free. The president said, no, I want a new trial against her. New trial, because I have new charges against her. And they brought in 14 new charges against Mosba, and she now is condemned to prison for 8 to 10 years, during which most people say that she's going to be killed, that she's going to be poisoned in prison, because that's what they do. They take you to prison and they poison you. And then they said you died of a heart attack. That's what is happening in the Middle East. That's what is happening throughout these countries. That's what they do in Iran. They do it in Israel. They do it in Iraq. They're doing it in Yemen. They're doing it in Egypt. They're doing it all over that world, which has a diaspora. Do you know that around 18 to 20 million black people live in the Middle Eastern diaspora? You know about the American diaspora. 110 million in Brazil, I told you. 50 million in the United States. 35 million in the Caribbean. But what do you know about India? Practically 400 million black people, Dravidians, in the south of India. And then in Asia, I told you already, those people in Kanak, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Solomon Islands, the blacks of Australia, all of this wide diaspora of Asia and the Pacific. So now Mosba, who is 66, she's a 66-year-old woman, everybody's mobilizing for her not to be killed. Just as in Israel, in Tunisia, sub-Saharan African immigrants, you know how they call them? You know, the term was invented by the Israelis. The Israeli says, blacks are not immigrants, they are infiltrators. That's how they call black people who come from abroad in Tunisia, infiltrators. So there is this wave of repression against sub-Saharan Africans, which is sweeping through the Middle East, but only through the Middle East? No. Since the year 2000, it's sweeping through Western Europe. Openly racist campaigns in Europe, Western Europe, the home of democracy. You have xenophobia. Xenophobia is rising and rising and rising. You have rising neo-Nazi parties. They are kicking out blacks out of Europe. Did you know that the European Union pays Tunisia, Morocco, Rwanda, and other countries, pays them money to kick out the blacks who are in Europe and send them to their countries? Did you know that? Did you know that that's what the European Union is doing? Do you know that the British left the European Union because they said too many blacks are coming into Europe, and since you can't control it, we want to leave and we will control our borders. That was called Brexit. Do you remember Brexit a few years ago? England said we are not part of Europe anymore because Europe cannot control its borders and too many blacks and Arabs are coming in. So I am going to control our borders. We are not going to allow Britain to continue to be negrified. There are already 6 million blacks here. We are not going to allow this to become 10 million like in France. Did you know that the population in France of blacks is around, they say sometimes people say 6, others say 7, others say 8 million. We don't know. But it's no less than 6 million blacks in Europe. In Italy is 1.2 million. In Portugal and Spain if you combine Portugal and Spain, you have practically 2 million black people there. They come from the former colonies. You remember, these are colonial countries. The populations which are there come from colonies. They've been there for 50 years, 60 years, 80 years. These are the people now being sent back home. And soon, these people who were born in those countries, have French citizenship, are going to be sent home too, because the new Nazi party in France is saying, we are not going to accept the constitution as it is. We are going to revoke the right of people who are born in France to call themselves French. So soon people who are born in France, have been living in France, are going to be sent home. That's Nazism. Because Trump is doing it. He's trying to change the constitution in the United States. And they call that in France, droit du sol, the right of the earth. They are going to change it. They're going to say it's a right, just like in Germany. Germany does, you're born in Germany, they don't consider you German. They say you have to be of German blood. That's what's going on in the world. And you know who introduced those laws? They were called the laws of Nuremberg. Hitler introduced those laws. The right blood. It was blood. He said no German can be here. He says the Jews are not Germans. He says they don't have German bloods. He says the Roms are not German. You know who are the Romas? The Romas are, you call them gypsies. They don't like that name. They're not gypsies. They're Romas. They're Romas. They're two nations, Romas and Sintis. Hitler said the Sintis and the Romans must be exterminated. They sent them to concentration camps. Did you know that? The only people who they talk about is the Jews in the concentration camp. And this was bad. 6 million people or 5 million people, 4 million, I don't care how many million people. You don't burn, incinerate people. But why don't you talk about the incineration and the extermination of the Sintis and the Romas also? And how about the blacks of Germany who were castrated, incinerated, and they were sent to these camps of concentration? They were blacks in Germany, black Germans. 2 books have come out recently for the first time, speaking about the genocide about the black Germans. Why? Why nobody talked about this until today? The European Union has already sent thousands of people out of Europe and paid Morocco, Rwanda, and Tunisia close to $1 billion, according to certain journalists and reporters who are Europeans, to receive all of the people that they're cleaning out Europe. They call it, you know that a book was written by a European, he said it in that book, his name is Dumont. He said, if we continue allowing blacks into this country, he says, Europe will lose its racial character. And you know what's the title of that book? The Great Replacement. He says, Europeans cannot be replaced by blacks. They must be sent out of here. And the National Party, which called itself the National Rally in France, which was before called the National Front, which was created by a man called Le Pen, Jean-Marie Le Pen. I was in France when that man created that party. And he was saying it. He says, we must take these blacks out of here. We don't care where they came from. If they came from Guadeloupe, send them back to Guadeloupe. If they came from Guyana, send them back to Guyana. They came from Martinique, send them back. They came from Mali, send them back. They came from Senegal, we don't care. Get them out of Europe. Because if not, Europe is going to become a negrified continent. Do you know that that man died 3 years ago, but that his party is the strongest party in France today? And that the French elections are going to take place next year. And that that party is going to win. The National Rally. His daughter is the president of that party, Madame Le Pen. And it seems like the president of that party, whom she placed this man as a president, his name is Bardella. He's going to become the next president of France. It seems next year. It's not within 20 years. A Nazi party will be in power in France. The Nazi party took power in Holland with Wilders. Nazi party took power in Austria. The Nazi party is about to take power in Portugal. Their name is Vox. Nazi party is about to take power in Spain. Their name is Chega. I'm sorry, Vox is in Spain and Chega is in Portugal. And the so-called Democratic Party of Deutschland in Germany is poised to take power. Again, Hitler's party, again, is going to take power in Germany. But the same thing is happening all over Europe. But it's not only happening in Europe. It's happening in Australia, it's happening in New Zealand, it's happening all over the world. And don't talk about the United States. Because believe me, if Trumpism is not Nazism, then I am not black. If Trumpism is not Nazism, well, then don't call me black because I'm not black. I am something else, red or green. That's what I'm here to tell you. That's what we're facing now. My father told me, I was born in 1942, so I didn't know what was going on. But afterwards, he told me, this is what happened to us. This is what happened in the world. And everything which he said to me, I'm seeing it happening today. People being expelled, blacks being expelled. Haitians are being thrown out of the United States like if they were dogs. You know what Hitler said? He said, we cannot allow Germany to be infected by worms. That's what Hitler said about the Jews. You know what Trump is saying about the Haitians? Trump said these people are cat eaters. They are cannibals. You know that. He didn't say it in a private meeting. It was in the papers. New York Times, Washington Post, all of the newspapers of the world. Le Monde reported it. That Haitians were cat eaters, that they were eating cat, and they will soon be eating babies in the United States after they finish with the cats. And when they asked them, well, how about the Africans? He says, they must go, leave. He said, I'm not interested in them. These Haitians just go back home. He says, the Africans go back home. He says, all of these countries are nothing. You know what he called them? African nations, black nations, and Haiti. You can't tell me you did not hear him. He said it publicly. He said, these are shit holes. And I don't want people from shit holes in the United States. That's what Hitler said. Hitler said, we want pure Aryan people. Trump said, we want people from Norway, Scandinavia, white countries, not from shitholes. But that same discourse is not only in America. You'll be a foolish person. You would be a naive. You're not naive. Nobody's naive anymore. No more. You don't have naive people anymore in the world. Because everybody's seeing what is going on. They have social media. They go online. You can get any information you want through ChatGPT. You have all of the means to avail yourself of information. So if you don't have the information, it's because you don't want it. Right now in Ukraine, which is at war, Who are these people? Zelensky and these people. They're Nazis. Zelensky is Jewish. So you're going to say to me, oh, if Jewish people are not Nazis, so how about the Israelis? They are not Nazis? Ukraine. Have you ever heard of Bandera, the Banderist movement? That was the Nazi party of Ukraine, which, along with Hitler, attacked Russia. Who is a Banderist? The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is a Banderist. The Banderist party is the party that is ruling Ukraine today. Kunder Bandera was his name, Hitler's ally, the army. Those are the part of the army which is fighting right now against Russia is the Banderist army, Banderist generals. Nobody says that. The press doesn't say that. The media doesn't say. They tell you, no, I mean, this fight in Ukraine is just the Russians invading, want to take the territory, and these people are nice people. But the blacks who have studied in Ukraine, those thousands of blacks who went to Ukraine to study, they can tell you the true story. So the neo-Nazi far right is already in power, elected in Hungary. They just took him out, Orban. But still the neo-Nazi power, another neo-Nazi power took over. His name is Magyar, the new president. The Netherlands, Wilders. Italy, her name is Meloni. She's a member of the Nazi Mussolinian party of Italy. She's a blonde, smiling woman, good-looking woman. You have seen her. She's very nice. Nazi. New Zealand, Nazi. It is so bad in New Zealand that the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, you remember her? Very nice-looking woman, liberal. She fled New Zealand and is now living with her family in Australia. White New Zealanders are fleeing New Zealand because of the situation. The new Nazi party who took over and has decided to fix the question of the Maoris. The Maoris are the native people of New Zealand. They represent 48 to 51% of the population. This new Nazi party says, okay, they will have no more rights in this country. So Jacinda Ardern, you remember her? She was just the prime minister until 2 years ago. Jacinda Ardern, who had agreed for the Maoris to have civil rights, was overthrown. She lost the election because the majority of white New Zealanders said no. Maoris cannot have the same rights that white people have. Exactly the same as in Australia. And Jacinda Ardern has just fled New Zealand and is now in Sydney, Australia. And all of those people who are white liberals who disagree with these Nazis are fleeing. Do you know that a lot of white liberals are fleeing the United States, that they said we're not going to live there? But where are they going to go? They go to Italy, they find a Nazi regime. They go to Austria, they find a Nazi regime. Those who are Jewish in the United States and who are liberals, they can't run to Israel. Because you have a lot of Jewish people who disagree totally with the government of Israel, which is an imperialistic and Nazi government. You have a lot of Jews. They are a minority, but they exist in Israel. They are a minority, perhaps 2-3%, because the overwhelming majority of Israelis are pro-Nazi. But you have 2 to 3% which are not. In the United States, there's a big Jewish population. I think it is the biggest Jewish population in the world. In Israel, you have 7 million Jews. in the United States, you have between 4 and 5. So it's the biggest diaspora of Jews. The majority of those Jews support the policies of Israel and of Netanyahu, of extermination of the Palestinians, extermination of whoever they have to exterminate to create what they call the Greater Israel. But you have a minority of Jews in the United States who are not like that, who are opposed to that. They are under attack right now by Trump. Where are they going to run? They cannot run to Israel because the Nazis are in power in Israel. They cannot run to Europe, to France, because the Nazis are going to take power in France next year. They cannot run to the country of sometimes of their forefathers in Austria, because a lot of the Jews come from Austria. They can't run there. The Nazis are there already. And they certainly cannot run to Germany. This is the world we're living in. And this is not only about the Middle East, it's not only about Europe, it's not only about the United States. Let's look at what they call Latin America, which is not Latin. Latin, there's no such a thing as Latin America. The number of Latin Hispanics in South and Central America are a minority. They rule. They rule everywhere. But they're not the minority. There's tiny minorities. Since 2018, it has also been Nazism has penetrated Latin America strongly. You have the imitators of Hitler, and you know what you know their names. Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. The Hitler #1 of Latin America, what they call Latin America, he's like this with Trump. They're like this. They're just one. Birds of a feather fly together. That's what my father always told me. He told me, when you see two people like this, he says, those people agree. No matter what they say to you, birds of a feather fly together. So I'm going to tell you who are the birds in what they call Latin America. Bukele is the first one. He's opened up a big, huge prison in the middle of the jungle, where he has put 80,000 people. That's where Trump is sending the people that he's throwing out of the United States. In Chile, who is your Hitler? His name is José Antonio Cast. He took power 4 months ago. K-A-S-T. In Honduras, his name is Nasri Asfura. He's an Arab descent. And in Latin America, what they call Latin America, a lot of your political leaders are of the Middle East, Arab descent, especially in Brazil. In Argentina, which has genocide, the entire black population. You know how many blacks are... I went to Argentina 4 years ago with my wife for business, for research, because I was researching on the blacks in Argentina. I met the black movements in Argentina. And I said, how many black Argentinians are left after the genocide? They told me we calculate between 1 million and 1.2 million. You know who is the president of Argentina? His name is Javier Milei, who voted again in the United Nations. I remind you, 3 nations voted and said we are not going to consider the enslavement of blacks as a crime against humanity, let alone the gravest crime. United States of Trump, Milei of Argentina, and Israel of Netanyahu. But let's go on. In Panama, who is in power? José Raúl Mulino. Who is José Raúl Mulino? A neo-Nazi. Bolivia. Who has taken power in Bolivia? Do you remember that the Bolivian government surprisingly elected a native What you call Indian, they don't call themselves Indians. They're not Indians. They're Native Americans. They elected a president in Bolivia for the first time in the history of Bolivia. Now, Bolivia is 85 to 88% Quechua and Aymara. Those are the majority people. They have never been in power. Never been in power. And for the first time, they elected a president who was a Native American. And immediately he started policies to help that majority population. They took him out. And you know who just they put in power in Bolivia? A neo-Nazi. A neo-Nazi. And his name is Rodrigo Paz Pereira. Don't forget that the neo-Nazis fled Germany and went to 3 countries: Paraguay, Bolivia, and Argentina, and Chile. 4 countries. I said 3, it's 4. They became the political leaders in those countries. In Paraguay, it was Alfredo Stroessner. You remember Alfredo Stroessner, the German. They speak German. All of them speak German. Their kids speak German. They go to German schools. Alfredo Stroessner was in power for 30 years in Paraguay. And it is the Stroessner family which rules Paraguay. So the Nazis rule Argentina, the Nazis rule Chile, the Nazis rule Bolivia. Well, let's talk about the country where blacks are the big majority. 110 million people. The country which imported 40% of the slaves. Of the 50 million captive, 40% went to Brazil. Do you know that the Nazi Party of Brazil took power a few years ago? You've never heard the name of Jair Bolsonaro? Bolsonaro, an army man, a former, who was part of the dictatorship that ruled Brazil for 25 years and ruled Brazil until 1985. All of these things young people don't know, but you should know. Because during that time was the heaviest repression in those 25 years against black people in Brazil. They were sterilizing black women in Brazil. Geisel, the dictator of Brazil, said every single black woman must be sterilized in this country. So the policies of sterilization of the black women in Brazil only stopped about hardly 20 years ago, that they no longer sterilize black, take their reproductive organs out. Well, Bolsonaro, who is for reinstituting the policies of sterilization of black people, Jair Bolsonaro took power in Brazil in 2018. Did you know that? And who put him in power? Did you know that the evangelical movement in Brazil is a neo-Nazi movement? Did you know that? That the neo-Nazi evangelicals are spreading all over the Caribbean, spreading all over Africa, and that they put Bolsonaro in power in 2019. What happened? A coalition of forces got together, and the next election, they pushed him out, but only by 1% to 2%. That tells you already what's going on in Brazil. The danger, because the elections are next year. And who is going up against Lula, who is a liberal? Is Bolsonaro's own son. His own son, which is the head of the Nazi party in Brazil. Well, you'll say to me, well, okay, why are all of these things happening all of a sudden? No, Césaire said to you that Hitler was not behind us. He was ahead of us. So these things have not been happening all of a sudden. All of this has been building up. The minute Hitler killed himself, committed suicide, he said it. He said, it doesn't matter whether I die, he said, because my disciples will take over the planet anyway. You know why? Because Hitler knew that the World War II wasn't a fight. The Americans said, oh, it's a fight for democracy. It wasn't a fight for democracy. Remember that practically 500,000 blacks took part in that fight. Not voluntarily, because there were French colonies. So the France took their troops from all of the French colonies. Cannon fodder. You know what is cannon fodder? People who you put in the front lines. They were the ones who do the war, the most dangerous charges, and they died like flies. They came from Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyana, Senegal, Gabon, Chad, all over those colonies which were French colonies. And the British did the same. Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Grenada, and all of the African colonies. Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, all of the colonies that they had were sent to fight Hitler. And the United States, more than 100,000 black Americans were sent to fight Hitler. Do you know that this was 1940, 1930s and 1940s? Do you know that people were being lynched in the United States then? Do you know that these black soldiers which were being sent to fight Hitler in Europe, that some of their parents had been lynched? Did you know that? And did you know that they went to Europe to fight and that the United States said they cannot fight in the same units with the whites? They fight in black units and whites fights in white units. Did you know that? So they were saying that they were going to fight Hitler to save democracy. That's what the British said, the French said, the Dutch said, the Americans said, that this was a fight to save democracy. Hitler was more honest. You know what Hitler said? This fight is about Lebensraum. In German, Lebensraum means living space. He says Germany cannot exist without the resources of Africa. And European countries are controlling Africa. And we must attack these European countries in order to take their colonies. He was clear. He says, that's where the resources are. He was clear. Hitler was not a liar like Trump is. Every 2 seconds, Trump is lying. There's nothing which comes out of the mouth of that man which is not a lie. But the other European leaders, they are like him, except that they are more diplomatic. In France, in Germany, in Italy, you know, they talk in ways, they talk about post-racial democracy and things like that. They talk about our fellow citizens with dark skin. They don't say blacks. They say our fellow citizens with dark skin, with a darker skin. Well, all of this has been in the making for the last 40, 50, 70, 80 years. And now it's in the open. What we have is Hitler is back. And you know what brought him back quickly? He was there, growing. But you know what made him an adult overnight? Barack Obama. Look back, and you will see that everything broke out into the open when Barack Obama won the election in 2008. And you know what was frightening? That he won it because blacks mobilized and the young white people mobilized. You know what made that election, what made it possible for Barack Obama to be president? Look at it. Black people are 15 to 16% of the population in the United States. They cannot elect a president on themselves, on their own. The young white people who were anti-racist, not all white Americans are racist. That's not true. Just like all Jews are not Zionists and are not Nazis. That's not true. Young white people were knocking. I remember I was in the US. They were knocking on doors of black people saying, vote for Barack Obama. If you remember well, it was Clinton who was running against Barack Obama. And Clinton said, that's nothing but fairy tale. A black man is fairy tale. He cannot be president of the United States. So don't waste your vote, he told the black people. Vote for my wife, Hillary Clinton. And the two Clintons are the most corrupt people in the United States outside of someone like Trump. Because this is nothing but corrupt people. American politics, French politics, British politics, German politics, Brazilian politics, Bolivian politics is nothing but corruption, corrupt people. So he said, don't vote. Don't waste your vote. He said, Barack Obama is a fairy tale. Go and look it up. Don't believe me. Look up you have Google, you have chat, you have all of the social media. So look it up. Look it up. If he didn't call Barack Obama a fairy tale. He said, vote for my wife. And do you know that a lot of blacks voted for Hillary Clinton? Because they said, oh, a black can never be president of the United States. Jesse Jackson tried it. Shirley Chisholm went for president, she tried it. A lot of blacks said, let's not waste our vote. Jesse Jackson got 14 to 16 million votes at the primaries. But still a lot of people say, it's impossible. It's not yet time for a black to be president. Maybe in 50, 60, or 100 years. Always, that's the way black people think. That's how they think. Microscopically. They don't see ahead. They don't plan big. They allow other people to think for them. But it was Barack Obama. When he was elected as president, to the surprise of everybody, the whole world was surprised. The whole world was in shock. And remember, black people were crying all over the world. In Africa, black people were crying in the streets like babies. Because for the first time, a black person with a black wife. Remember? Because the formula for success in this world is if you're black and you're a black politician, you're a black footballer, you're a black actor, you're a black anything which is successful, your wife must not be black. You know that. Don't tell me you don't know that. Because I'll tell you that you're lying. Because we all know it. That a black woman cannot be your wife if you're successful. Because they'll throw you out. You will be thrown out. So when Barack Obama came into that White House with a black woman and saying, he says, don't call me mulatto, I'm not a mulatto. Don't call me that, I am a black person. That's the first thing he said. You know what that meant for the world, for the black world, for global Africa? Someone who came with dignity. You know, I am not condoning a lot of things that Barack Obama did a lot of things, like he attacked Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan. He did several things that I didn't agree with. But I'm telling you, that was a historic moment for all black people. It was a liberating movement. What it did symbolically for black people was incredible. Nothing had done that. And you know what that unleashed? It unleashed activism all over the black world. In the Middle East, in South America, in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. Everybody said, this is possible. That's when the whites said, okay, we must stop it. That's why Netanyahu said he should have never become president in the United States because things are going to get out of hand. That's what is reported that Nazi said. That's what was reported that Nazi said. But you know something? That Nazi was correct. That it is because once Obama took power, blacks started walking the streets straight up. And that's when they started killing them in the United States in the streets. George Floyd was just one of hundreds of black people who were killed since Obama took power. Women and men. You heard of the Black Lives Matter movement. They became frightened. So many black people in the streets, 300,000, 500,000, and a lot of young whites. They got frightened. And that's when they created what they called the Tea Party first. Before you had this MAGA movement of Trump, it was called the Tea Party. So Trumpism, MAGA Trumpism, opened up the doors to the meteoric rise of a Nazi-fascist movement all over the world. In this context, the global excesses of MAGA Trumpism, catching people in their homes, taking them out of bed, taking them to the United States, bombing Iran with the heaviest bombing equipment you have. In fact, they're bombing Iran with what they call mother bombs, which are, I won't talk to you about this. It's the most horrible weapon you can use on a population. So all of these things which are happening, they are no more than a reflection of the global rise of a Nazi fascism, this time without Hitler, and it is multinational, multilingual. It is Hitlerism without Hitler. And Césaire said that Hitlerism was not born in Germany, it was born in the concentration camps of slavery during the 350 years in the Caribbean. So don't tell me you do not understand this. Because I am here today simply for one reason. For those who don't understand it really, those blacks who don't really understand it, from today, you cannot say that you don't understand what's going on in the world. Because let me tell you something. Anyone who doesn't understand what is happening in the world today, it is because they do not want to understand. Simply because they do not care, or because they agree with what is happening. Either you don't want to understand, or it is because you agree. Because what is happening is that global Nazism, the neo-fascist regimes are taking over the world. And in that situation, if you tell me that you don't understand or that you don't care, you're saying the exact same thing that you are for. And I'm telling you that these are my last years of life, but until my last breath, I will fight against. That's what I had to say to you today, folks.